it's weird thinking about how you're in this space where you're like in a dark tunnel, or again, the golf analogy, in this kind of never ending deep bunker that you just can't get out of. And I did not see a way out of it. And so I thought to myself, the only way out of this is, by thinking about, is my life actually worth living?
Welcome to Golf Yourself Healthy. I'm your host, Chris Lynch. If you believe that golf is good for you and are looking for a podcast which matches that belief, well, you have struck gold. Here at GYH, we are on a mission to build a supportive and nurturing community in which we are bonded together by a shared love for golf, as well as a desire to help each other to lead happier, healthier, and more fulfilled lives. If this sounds like a community that you would like to be a part of, then why not join us? Using the link provided in the show notes, it's free to join, and there you'll be accompanied by many other golfing kindred spirits and others who, like me, believe in golf's unique ability to help us overcome adversity, build resilience, and learn valuable life skills which can be applied both on and off the golf course. Introducing today's guest, Danny Clark, founder of Florio Golf, a growing platform which has a mission to raise awareness about mental health through the medium of golf. As Danny and I discussed during the conversation, there's something truly unique about golf, and indeed what it can do to improve our mental health, if we allow it to, which few other sports can offer. It's more and more common these days to hear golf referred to as a form of therapy, and as you'll hear, that's very much been the case for Danny. As someone who previously played college golf in the US and had aspirations to turn professional, Danny's why for playing golf is much different today, and it's very apparent that golf has played an incredibly important role in him not only coming to terms with and accepting his mental health challenges, but crucially in helping him get out of the bunker and get well. Danny, you receive my respect and love for the way you open up in such a raw and emotive way in this conversation, and for inspiring others through Florio Golf to go out and seek help and support for their mental health, but also to use golf as a means to improve your mental health and to turn up the volume on a topic which must continue to stay under the spotlight. Without any further ado, let's tee off and jump into the conversation. Danny, welcome to Golf Yourself Healthy. Danny, you are a man who likes to golf himself healthy. It's always good to have people on the podcast who share our ethos. As ever, the logical starting point, I think, for us is to get to know our guest a bit more. So who is Danny Clark?
Thanks a lot, Chris. Thanks for having me on, firstly, and for all the work you're doing as well. I think I've been a long-time listener of GYH myself, and have loved all the inspirational guests you've had on so far. I know it's only going to get better going forward. So, yeah, well done to everything you're doing, and thank you.
Thank you. No pressure on that point. Oh, thank you.
Exactly right. No, but yeah, so I'm Danny. I think despite my very British sounding name, so Daniel Clark, I was actually born and raised in Germany, to a dad from Leeds in England and a mother from Denmark, Copenhagen. And yes, you mentioned, golf being a big part of my life. It really has. I would say I was essentially born with a golf club in my hand. I like to say my dad is a PGA professional himself. And he actually built what was at the time the first 18-hole public golf course in Germany. So that was a big deal back then. And so he's always been very much into inclusivity in golf, making it open to the public. And that's kind of what I grew up with all my life as well, in Germany, is this kind of golf world, essentially. And I played competitively throughout my junior years. And essentially after high school, I was a scratch golfer and then got a scholarship to go over to the US. And at the time, obviously, my dream was, I'm going to be a professional golfer. I'm going to be out there traveling the world on tour. So I joined a university in South Carolina in the US and played college golf out there. It didn't take long for me to realize that however good I was back home in Germany, I was not good enough to play with in the big leagues. I quickly realized that in my first year at university that, I was playing quite well, but I was just nowhere near good enough to compete with the big guys out there. And so I decided pretty early on, after 1 year, to actually put the golf clubs to the side. However, painful that was for me, and to actually spend a bit more time focusing on my academics instead. And I finished my degree there in South Carolina, and then I actually went on to do a master's degree at the University of St Andrews. So golf stayed very much a big part of my life there as well.
Was there any golf influence that had its say in the decision to go to St Andrews, or was that just totally by chance?
I would say it definitely helped me make my decision to go there. I think obviously that the first and foremost is that it's a great academic school. So academically speaking, it was kind of my main decision. But obviously, it did very much help the fact that there were plenty of golf courses on my doorstep that I could take advantage of while I was there as well. So that was amazing time there. Absolutely loved it. So I was there for a year. I actually wrote my master's thesis about about golf as a brand. So the perception of golf as a brand and how it's being perceived around the world. So it's stayed a very interesting topic to me throughout my educational career. And after that, I then basically moved to the Middle East. So again, traveled somewhere else, and got a great job working at a Big Four company, working in management consulting. I was there for a couple of years, and then after that, moved to London, where I then continued my career in learning and development. And I only just recently, 6 months ago, actually got a big promotion. I got promoted to stay-at-home dad. So I've now actually kind of mini half officially retired from my actual career, and for the time being, I'm now focusing on being a stay-at-home dad to my son, who's now 6 months old. So I would say that is my my professional answer as to who I am.
Thanks for the introduction, Danny. There's so much to unpack there. I suppose, thinking about the contrast between, I guess, with your upbringing in continental Europe, then in Germany, and then now you're in the UK now, you spent that time in the US. See, what did that teach you, if anything, about golf culture around the world and how it differs?
Interesting question. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting to see how different it really is across the world. I think in Germany, it's definitely not as popular because obviously I lived in Germany for most of my life growing up, and then from there went to the US, where it is, loved by almost everyone, it seems. But I think it's also part of how it's actually enjoyed and played. In Germany, it's seen as quite a serious competitive sport, still quite conservative, I would say, and it still is now. Whereas in the US, it's a bit more comparatively a bit more casual. In Germany, you wouldn't get a golf buggy, for example, right? Whereas in the US, you would then, if you're playing a casual round, it wouldn't be unusual to get a golf buggy, put a case of beers in the back, listen to some music. You couldn't do that in Germany. You'd get a lot of strange looks, I think. And then, across in the UK as well, I think it's kind of an in-between between the two cultures in Germany and the US. That being said, I think golfers across the world love the sport so much, but I think for different reasons in different ways because of that, because there are so many different ways to enjoy it. And I think that's evident by, what I've seen across the world in terms of how people actually play golf and how they decide to enjoy it, whether it is more on the competitive side, walking 18 holes, walking 36 holes, or whether it is in a golf buggy with some music on and, having a laugh, having a couple of drinks. So, yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. I think what's quite interesting is, at least from what I'm observing, in the UK, I probably would have said that historically, anyway, that what you describe in Germany would probably have been, maybe even 5-10 years ago still, that would have been the perception of golf to the outside looking in. However, as I'm sure you're seeing as well from your vantage point, I mean, you and I are both obviously sort of looking at golf at least partly these days through like a social media lens and things like that as well. And I think it's a lot more expressive, progressive, so which can, I think can only really be a good thing by and large. It would just be interesting to see if continental Europe, for example, takes on a similar approach, if that's the word.
Yeah.
And I'm just thinking again. You've therefore had an introduction to golf through family connections, through obviously your time in South Carolina. Do you say it was, or North Carolina? Yeah, sorry, South
South, yeah.
Carolina. The sort of the college setup and things like that. So what I'm hearing is certainly at that stage in your life, quite again, for want of a better word, almost like a serious expression of golf. Just because when you're competing with a view to try and make it professional, it's an all-in kind of thing, right? It's quite intense. So I'm almost wondering, like, how today, what does golf for Danny look like today?
Yeah, very good question. And that's exactly, yeah, my mindset around golf now has really changed from, I would say, back in the day. I think, growing up, I was always extremely competitive when it came to golf. Took it very, very serious, was playing in bigger tournaments, and then obviously played college golf as well. So, I went into golf with this competitive mindset. And I feel like that came with its own kind of mental health side to it already as well. Having to deal with that from a competitive standpoint, there's a lot of pressure on you. You put a lot of pressure on yourself as well. Since then, since now accepting the fact that I'm probably not going to be on the PGA Tour anytime soon, I've changed my mindset more around golf, and I now look at it more as a way to relax, to enjoy myself, to spend time with friends. And so from a mindset and mentality or mental health perspective, it's now kind of shifted away from this arena where I'm putting a lot of pressure on myself to something that I'm actually using to do the opposite, to actually alleviate pressure off of myself, to take some time to be out in nature, take some time to talk to some friends, just be out there without my phone, enjoying a round of golf, chasing a little white ball around, not taking my score too seriously anymore, which back then I would laugh at the fact if I ever thought I would not be looking at my score. But it's just not as important to me anymore. It's now more important to me to actually go out and enjoy my time out there, which I really do.
Yeah, yeah, great. I'm glad to hear that. Do you know something? Almost like a challenge I lay down to you, which I'm laying down to myself as well, and let's you and I speak again maybe 6 months from now and see how we're getting on with this. But I think when you were mentioning there about not leaving your phone behind, but just not having it in view when you're on the golf course or not using it or whatever. I subscribe to that certainly, and I've always, what you describe in terms of what you get out of golf, I get similar things. But what I am finding now since I've been doing GYH is, yeah, is trying to combine content creation, for example, with your golf. It's almost you have to watch a little bit. It's like you got to remember, why am I doing this in the first place? So I think my challenge that I'm laying down to you is, as you grow Florio Golf, which we'll talk about in a moment, is somehow managing to combine the content creation on the golf course, which is almost like a given that you need to do that to grow your brand, but at the same time somehow managing to keep a sacred space and a sacred uh, form of your golf that does the things for you in a mental health capacity that you describe. So I don't know if that's even occurred to you yet, or if that's even been a challenge that you've encountered.
No, it has. Yeah, it's a really, really good point actually, because I've never really been one to get my phone out on the golf course, and I think that probably comes from back in the day. When I used to play competitively, it was first thing you do as soon as you get out of the car, is phone gets turned off, completely off, not even on silent, and it doesn't come out until after the round again. And that's kind of still what I feel like I am doing these days. I tend to kind of just leave it in the golf bag and don't worry about anything, kind of in the outside world, I would say. But I do agree with you, Kris, that now, since kind of starting to get a little bit more into the content world as well, I've obviously had to naturally get the phone out a little bit more on the golf course. I think what I have been trying to do and hope to continue to do as well in that respect is to still, avoid, I don't know, avoid incoming calls, avoid text messages. Maybe I'll put my phone on do not disturb. Do it that way. And that still lets me record my content, but still kind of isolates me from that weird online social media world out there to some extent. Yeah,
So, anyway,
definitely.
let's talk to Florio Golf. Tell us all about it. What's its origin story? What are your aspirations for it?
Yeah, great. So I guess I'll go a step back. Obviously, in the beginning, I spoke about essentially my resume. The pitch perfect answer there. But I think what I've realized, especially over the past 2 years or so, is that despite having this kind of very, highly regarded resume and everything looks great on paper, underneath all of that, there's kind of always been a lot brewing, I would say, that not a lot of people know about and still don't know about. It's still something that, I don't talk about or share very often. I've always been a very aspirational person, and I've always had really kind of ambitious goals in life. And I've always wanted to be really successful at anything I did, really. And I was always really good at reaching those goals as well, kind of academically, golf wise as well, more or less. But what I've come to learn over the past 5 years or so, I'd say, is that all these goals that I was setting for myself in my life, they weren't necessarily my aspirations. They were actually more kind of aspirations that, of things that are perceived in society as being something that is successful or good, So things like obviously getting good grades in school, right? That was something I was aspiring for at first. Then it was, let's go to a good university, right? Let's go to a good university to get a master's degree. That's supposed to be good, getting a master's degree. So I'll do that at a good university. Then, okay, what should I do as a career? Well, working in consulting is supposed to be good. That's highly regarded. So I ended up kind of following these aspirations, these goals that weren't necessarily my own. And it didn't actually hit me until about 2 years into my first proper job, which was in the Middle East working at the Big Four organization, where I started to think to myself, is this it? I was now had been working at this company for 2 years or so. And I started to think, is this really what I've been working towards my whole life? Is this what I'm going to be doing for the rest of my life now? The job itself, highly regarded, didn't mind the job itself, but it involved a lot of travel, a lot of late nights of work. And you basically just lived for the weekend, and the weekends you got together with colleagues and went to parties, you drank a lot of alcohol. And that was basically my week. Every single week on this beginning of the week, you'd fly off to a project. End of the week, you'd fly back. You'd live in a hotel all week. And the weekends, you'd just be filled with booze and parties. That, after a couple of years of doing that, really I realize now in hindsight, started to take a toll on me. Again, in the back of my mind, I always had this thought of, is this it? Is this really me now for the rest of my life? And it started to kind of gradually bear down on me. I don't really know how else to describe it. I can use a golf analogy. I know you'd probably love that.
You know me. If you've been listening to the GYH podcast for a while, let's do it.
Exactly. So I felt like over those 2 years that I was in a bunker, I was trying to get out of the bunker. And I was just hitting and was not getting out. And I was essentially emptying the bunker of all the sand, and I was going deeper and deeper and deeper into that bunker. And that was in my head, my mental health. And it got to a point where I was depressed. I really was. I was depressed. It was something that I wouldn't necessarily admit to myself at the time. It definitely wasn't something that I was talking to anyone about. But it was something that now in hindsight, I look back at, and it was clear to me that I was not in a good place. I had no kind of positive outlook on life. I didn't see any kind of light at the end of a tunnel or anything like that. I was just kind of spinning in this hamster wheel every week, working, drinking, working, drinking, working, drinking. That's all I was doing. And again, is this what I want to do for the rest of my life? And it got to a point where I look back at it now in 2019 where I really just hit rock bottom. It was one specific day, and I can talk about it in more detail as well later on if you want to. But I really just woke up one morning, and it was the first time ever that I thought to myself, if this is my life, if this is going to be the rest of my life, then I don't want that to be my life. I don't want to continue living this life. So what's the point? That was my thinking on this one, what I look back at now, very, very, very dark day for me. I only remember it kind of in kind of fuzzy waves, I would say, because I ended up drinking that day as well. That was kind of my solution to drown out, the things that I was thinking in my head. Yeah, on that day was the first and really the only time that I considered taking my own life, because it's weird with depression. And now looking back at it again, I think I can speak more about it with a more level head on my shoulders. But it's weird thinking about how you're in this space where you're like in a dark tunnel, or again, the golf analogy, in this kind of never-ending deep bunker that you just can't get out of. And I did not see a way out of it. And so I thought to myself, the only way out of this is, by thinking about, is my life actually worth living? If this is what it's going to be like, really.
Well, Danny, first of all, I'm glad you are still here. And I'm glad that it seems, or one can assume that before you're stood here now and sharing all this, you feel in a better place, and to be able to describe in relation to that very cunning frame of mind that you find yourself in, which, unless you've been in that very dark place, which I think I have too, I've shared about it on this podcast, then you can't truly ever understand what it's like for someone's mind to go there, or to even fathom the possibility of taking your own life, But again, there's a lot I would probably like to unpack with you, as much as you feel comfortable doing so. The relationship with alcohol and that environment that you found yourself in the Middle East, right? In Dubai, I think you said specifically, right? So
Yeah.
when you work in that kind of environment that you described, because again, in consulting and Big Four and stuff, and especially in in a Dubai has and again, my wife grew up out there. I've visited many times. I know what it's like. I can see it. The bottomless brunches and the lifestyle, and it's all certainly for us Westerners. There's almost this really weird kind of like little micro culture that's been set up for us out there. It's altogether very easy to get sucked into that. At any point back then, were you able at all to speak to anyone about it, or did you just feel like, do you know what? Nah, it's not the done thing. It's a sign of weakness, whatever.
That's exactly it, Chris. I think I could have had the support network out there had I guess taken the initiative to actually speak up and speak out about what was going on in my head. So I lived with three other guys at the time in Dubai, all of them good friends. They all worked at the same company as well, so we all had the same job. We kind of were going through the same stuff, and all guys that would more than happily have sat down with me and talked about things. It's something that I just didn't have in me. I really found it hard to open up. And honestly, it's still something that I do struggle with at times, and it's something that I'm really working on. But the like you just said, the kind of the thought of talking about what was actually going in my head, it was something that I thought would maybe make me seem weak, or make me seem like I couldn't handle things, make me seem like I wasn't up for the job out there as well, maybe. So I just kept it to myself. I did the classic and I don't want to generalize here, but kind of the stereotypical, guy thing of bottling it up. And that weight just kept on building. And, eventually it kind of got to this point where I realized I just couldn't keep going on it alone on that journey, and that's essentially when I hit that rock bottom moment. Was after that a little bit of a wake up call, obviously, going into the future as to how I handle these things.
Yeah, it's I really, I really appreciate and very grateful when anyone comes on this podcast and feels able to just go beneath the surface on this stuff, because again, I would encourage you much in the same way I hope that you would encourage me to always push through that discomfort barrier, that fear barrier of bottling it all up or not, because you were saying there that even to this day, although you had that realization back then, and maybe you're in a better place now, it's still difficult at times to open up. And I do experience that too. And when you're like you are on a podcast and you're making yourself vulnerable just by the very act of sharing quite personal stuff, what you're doing now, it's like, you are doing something really helpful for people, because in actual fact there'll be so many people out there listening to this that probably feel exactly the same. And you just got to remember that if we don't do it, you can't just wait. You can't always just wait and rely on someone else to do it, if that makes sense. If you feel strong enough to be able to share that, then do it, is always my thought process.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think also, talking about Florio Golf soon as well, it's kind of, two sides of it. I think from a selfish perspective, it's something that I'm essentially using as an outlet to open up about things that have gone on in my past. There's still, I mean, it's still a very small circle of friends and family that actually know about my history and my past. And it's gotten to a point now where I want to use an outlet to open up a little bit more about it. And then on the other side, exactly as you mentioned, Kris, I'm not the only one that's feeling this, and neither are you. There's other people that are feeling or experiencing, poor mental health in lots of different ways, not in maybe in the exact way that you and I are experiencing it. But and that's kind of the idea with Florio Golf in a short sentence is really to, create something that encourages these kind of conversations to happen in a more normalized fashion, through the power of golf, essentially.
Yeah. And it's, am I right in saying it's fairly recently been launched? I mean, I will, as with any of my guests, put up the link, for instance, to your Instagram page in the show notes. I mean, I love there's a certain playfulness to some of the imagery that you use, and the graphics and the brand templates and things. I mean, tell us even a bit about the origins to that, or the thought that went into creating that, and almost the kind of the visuals and the narrative that you're trying to build with it.
Absolutely, yeah. So it is still a very young, literally launched kind of officially probably about a month ago or so. So, still testing the waters with things, but really what I'm aiming for is to create what I'm calling a mental health brand. So I want this to be a mental health brand that really focuses on making mental health a natural part of golf culture, essentially. So using golf to spark conversations about how we're really doing. And my dream, really, at the end of the day, is for golf to be a game where talking about your mental health is, just another part of your round. Just as easy as talking about, how rubbish you played last week, or the next swing fix you're making, or whatever it may be. It's something, again, that I myself struggled with in terms of opening up to people. And I found that golf was a brilliant way for me to actually lighten up a little bit, and actually an opportunity to start opening up and speaking to friends more about how I was actually doing. And what I found over the past years or so is that the best conversations I've had, the most meaningful conversations I've had, have all been on the golf course with friends, where I've shared something with them, oftentimes something I've never shared with anyone before, because you're out there for 4 hours, again, no phone in sight, loads of time to chat. And then in return, a lot of the times my friends would come back with something they were dealing with themselves, and it then turned into a bit of a conversation around how we're actually feeling, having a real conversation on the golf course, and not just, don't get me wrong, we still talk about rubbish, have a couple of drinks here and there and laugh at each other's terrible swings. But within that, then we still, have a little bit more of a real conversation as well. And that's kind of where Florio Golf was born. So creating what I like to call a brand that raises awareness through the power of golf. There's so many of us out there that enjoy playing golf, but I think just aren't necessarily in the right or in a place to open up and have these conversations. And I think it's such a brilliant avenue. It's such a fantastic way to have these chats. And so that's what I'm kind of trying to do here, is to raise awareness through this platform. And I think, going back to your question around, or your point around, the playfulness aspect to it, I think for me myself, something that was always quite intimidating to me, I would say, is this idea of sitting down, having an extremely serious chat, attending therapy. Those kind of things were always very, very intimidating to me personally. And for me personally, I found it a lot easier to kind of ease into this through a medium or a platform that I enjoyed. So that for me was golf, and using golf as kind of a way to kind of ease into this. And so what I'm really trying to do through the Florio brand is to create something where we're putting a little bit more of a playful, lighthearted twist on this, almost injecting a little bit of humor into this very serious topic, to hopefully, try to engage individuals that may, up until now, not really have traditionally spoken about how they're doing, or even listen to conversations about that. And so the goal through the brand is really, there's three main parts to it. I'd say first and foremost is the aim is to really build a community around what we're doing. So getting people together, again, not trying to turn this into a therapy session in any way, but more creating a community where we all feel comfortable enough to open up, or at least listen to conversations, to know that we're not the only ones going through this stuff.
I was going to say, so what is it about golf in your mind that lends itself so well to what you're trying to do from a mental health awareness and injecting mental health conversations onto the golf course? What is it about golf?
There's a lot of different things, right? I mean, there's the kind of known mental health benefits of golf itself, I would say, the idea of being outside in nature, kind of a bit of an escape from reality, from the daily stresses you might be feeling. But then there's also the social aspect to it, the idea of having these friendships that are kind of formed over golf, and using those friendships in a bit more of a meaningful way to actually speak more openly about how you're actually doing, and again, that doesn't have to be super deep, but it could just be about, work's horrible at the moment, something simple as that. Conversations that I don't feel like are happening as often as they potentially could. And I feel like golf is such a good platform to be able to do that, because of all the benefits it brings, the time that you have out there. Golf takes a long time. You have a lot of time between shots to chat, to take things in around you. And then I also think, there's a personal growth element to golf as well. I think golf teaches you a lot about life, that I think can also be translated into how you deal with things when it comes to your mental health. I think I'm thinking of things like resilience, patience, accepting mistakes, which there's a lot of in golf. being frustrated out there. It's all things that I think we all face in our actual lives as well off the golf course. And so I think there's a lot that we can learn from golf itself. I actually heard this quote. I thought it was really funny, and that golf is like therapy to me, but it's also the reason I go to therapy. So it's kind of this twofold, these twofold to golf, that it's can be really therapeutic, but it can also be a nightmare out there. But it can teach you a lot in the process.
Yeah, and I think I was curious for your perspective on it, because I think again, obviously, in the time that I've been doing this podcast and interviewing people, asking for their perspective on what golf means to them and how it helps with mental health and things, I think it will help with our mental health if we allow it to. If we allow golf to be that thing for us. And it's interesting because I can't remember if I mentioned to you in our previous conversation, but I recently went on this golf trip in France with a bunch of guys that I've been going away with every year. It's like a Ryder Cup format thing, and the team element got removed from it this year. So it was very much an individual 3-day thing, which actually changed the dynamics quite a lot, because this social element that you talk about, I find that when you play golf in team formats, which is, I mean, you maybe did a bit of that in South Carolina. I don't know, like in the college, was that a thing even like back then? Was it more just individual competition?
So you play individually, but you're playing as a team, right? You're representing the university, so you're traveling with your college team of 5 players basically to the different
Okay,
tournaments.
okay, so let's lift the hood on this a little bit more then, because I'm curious now. So with that in mind, let me ask you: when you were in that environment, what mattered to you more, how Danny Clark did or how the team did?
Oh, great question. I mean, honestly, looking back, I've never thought of that before. I mean, honestly, first and foremost, I probably first thought how I was doing over the team itself. Ultimately, obviously, you want to win as a team, but at the same time, there's about 12, 13 guys on the roster, and only 5 guys make the team that travel to the tournament. So there's this kind of internal competition going on as well, as to you need to prove yourself a little bit, and you need to qualify to actually play in the actual tournaments. And then when you get to the tournaments, you're kind of expected to perform because you've been chosen to play. So absolutely, obviously, you want to do well as a team, right? You want to go out there and win. But I do think I have to admit, first and foremost, there is a bit of a selfish element to it, that I wanted to perform, prove myself to this team that I was good enough to compete, and be part of this kind of team process.
Well,
The big
well, it's so
leagues.
interesting because the fact that you hadn't necessarily stopped to think about it before was very much the same as a friend of mine who was on that trip I was referring to, and it was quite funny because this is the first year that GYH has been in existence. I've never been a podcaster when I've turned up at that event before. And I would like rock up on the putting green on day one with a microphone and shove it underneath someone's face. And, I don't think some of them thanked me for that, because they're just there to have a good time, and don't want their face and voice plastered all over social media or podcasts or whatever. But there was one guy in particular who's I think he's like a 7 or 8 handicapper, and he's a good golfer. I mean, quite an athletic guy, and he's got a background in, he's grown up playing sport to, not a high level, but to a competitive level
Good.
anyway.
Yeah.
And I asked him about this. I mean, for one thing, before I go to this point, like I was asking some of the guys, what does golf yourself healthy mean to you? And a few of them were like, God, Kris, you've become so philosophical, man. And I was like, well, no, I actually haven't. Like that, this
Mm.
is who I've always been, and maybe you just haven't bothered to get to know me on that level. But that less so much about that, but it really taught me a valuable lesson, Danny, in that's been of value to me in GYH, and it might be to you and Florio as well, which is I think I have to get comfortable that the message that I'm putting out there, and talking about being in touch with your feelings, and for men to talk about mental health and stuff like that, that it just isn't for everyone,
Mm.
and some people, the reason why they play golf does differ from person to person. And using this single figure handicap guy as an example, we were sat down for dinner at the end of day 2, and I said to him, don't you miss the team format this year? He said, nah, it's never bothered me. I just
Mm.
turn up for me. I want to play my best. So he very openly said that, and literally over the way it's always been over the years, over those 3 days, has been, it mimics the Ryder Cup. So it's like same formats, the same number of points are at stake.
Mm.
Um, and the difference between me and him was that, like, if I walked off the golf course at the end of a match play match and had lost my match, but I knew my team had won the day, I still got a good bounce from that and a
Mm.
good vibe. Whereas he walked off back then, and even on this trip in France, he's like, unless I'm scoring to my handicap, it's shit. It's not good enough,
Yeah.
basically, and it just fascinates me how there's just such a difference in, like I say, that people's why for playing golf, but also like it goes to my core point around like mental sorry, golf to aid your mental health can be that if you allow it to be that.
Mhm.
But equally, it is hard for it to be that if you're turning up with competitive metrics in mind, basically. So it's an interesting one.
Couldn't agree more. And I think myself, I've kind of seen both sides of the spectrum, both sides of the coin, I guess. I've been on the competitive side of things where, I feel like golf can really, it can have a negative impact on your mental health. You hear it about, professional golfers out there that are trying to make it, and struggling to keep their tour card or their challenge tour card or whatever it is, barely making ends meet. It's tough. It's not easy, and it can really take a big toll on your mind, and it's a lot of pressure. And I've, experienced that to some extent as well. And then on the other side, you then have this positive benefits that it can bring, like you said, Kris, if you allow it to. But I think there is that element of, how competitive are you about this, right? I think there's a difference between those girls and guys out there that are doing this for a living and trying to really make a career out of this versus, you and I who go out there hopefully to have a little bit of fun and enjoy ourselves. So I think there's kind of two sides to it a little bit, and you've hit the nail on the head with it with your example there.
Mm. Let's I think one of the final things I'll chat to you about, which I'm probably most looking forward to speaking to you about, is fatherhood, right? So your
Mhm.
son is 6 months old, you said now. What was his name, did you say, Danny?
His name's Rory.
Rory.
Mhm.
So yeah, the what you were saying about being like a full-time stay-at-home dad. Just firstly talk to us about kind of what that means to you. I know from what you said right back at the top of this conversation, it sounds like today's almost like day one of that whole arrangement. Your wife's just gone back to work, and but kind of, have you got a sense already of how much you're looking forward to that and what that's going to mean to you?
Yeah, I mean, the day he was born, I know it sounds so cliche because I feel like everyone says it, but it really was, best day of my life. Really, it just felt this kind of weird feeling in my body. And the months following that now, so he's 6 months old now. The months following that, I just felt my own, from myself, my own perspective, my mental health shifted completely. I really started to have even more of a positive outlook on life. I kind of had a little bit of a reason to keep on going, I guess, to some extent. And for me now, I'm so looking forward to this opportunity to, just raise him and to be with him as he grows up. I think it's something that I'm so fortunate and lucky that I'm able to do that. And the arrangement we have at home here, that it all works out for us. But it's something that I'm just, yeah, very grateful to be able to do, and I'm really looking forward to it as well. And it does help that he's been so far quite an easy baby. Actually, he sleeps really well, and he's happy most of the time. I know now that I've said this, I've definitely jinxed it, but yeah, he's.
We're
We'll
going to
see.
hear him the next 5-10 minutes kicking off, kicking and
Exactly,
screaming. No, I'm
exactly.
sure he won't.
No. But yeah, I'm really really looking forward to it, and honestly, it's him now being around is also one of the primary drivers, I would say, of me actually starting Florio Golf. Because
Mm.
I feel like now that I've got a son who's ultimately, hopefully, going to be looking up to me, I want him to be raised in an environment where it feels normal to talk about your mental health. And again, not in a way that you need to sit down with a candle and a notebook and start telling me in a therapeutic way, but just that you can have normal conversations about these things. Because again, it's something that obviously impacted me in a negative way. And I don't want it to be the same for him and for future generations in general. And so that's, I would say, one of the underlying reasons why I've decided to launch this brand now going forward as well.
Yeah, yeah. It's again quite a lot I can relate to with that. Just, what you said about him being part of or the reason why you're doing Florio Golf. My son Innes, who you know about, is kind of largely my why, or or it was, that losing him was the trigger event I somehow needed. Sounds strange to frame it that way, but for me to actually kind of go, do you know what? I'm just going to do this. It's been an idea that's formulating in my head, and I've got the inspiration now to go and do it. And there was something I was going to ask you there actually, because it's something we're talking about right now, as well as something we talked about earlier on with regards your again the career in consulting, but then the more recent career in learning and development, and let's call it the corporate world, and also like the struggles as well of like professional golfers. So realistically speaking, for them to get the mental health benefit of playing golf, that's a stretch.
Mm-hmm.
But they've got the trappings of the tour life. So when the going's good and the money's good, they can afford nice holidays. They can take their family away. And you maybe know where I'm going with this, because certainly where I find myself today, trying to grow GYH, but I'm in a nice number and a nice career in banking at the moment, which isn't necessarily where I'm getting my passion and sort of inspiration from. I'm all very much thinking ahead to the arrangement that you've got with being a stay-at-home dad with Rory sounds beautiful and really amazing. But part of that for me, and just thinking about me taking this step into the unknown almost with GYH and trying to make that my thing, it comes with a certain fear of, I'm used to the trappings of the corporate world and how
Mm-hmm.
well it pays, and so I almost wonder, have you? I would love to almost get some advice or inspiration from you just around how you find that whole. Did you have to overcome any fear of financial insecurity or anything like that at all to take the step that you are now?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think it partly goes back to what I was talking about earlier, where I kind of had this moment of realization when I was in the Middle East that everything that I'd been working towards, all these aspirations, they weren't actually my dreams, they weren't my goals. I wasn't passionate about becoming a management consultant, but I didn't actually realize that until I was actually in the situation itself. And it took some time after that, but I got into a mindset eventually where I told myself, and this sounds super cheesy and cliche, but to actually follow my dreams and my passions. Growing up, I was always, for some reason, quite money driven. I always kind of thought, I'm going to earn as much money as possible. I'm going to be a multimillionaire, whatever I do. But now that I've kind of gone through all of this, all of these experiences, I've found that that's not where my values lie. It's actually more on, I want to do something that fulfills me and that I'm actually passionate about. And That's really what's driving me. I remember it still so clear when I was younger. My dad always told me, he's like, do something the rest of your life that you want to wake up every morning and jump out of bed and start doing immediately. And I always think about that whenever I start something new or think about a career or anything. As is that going to make me jump out of bed, ready to go? A lot of the time, it's probably not been the case, you know. And that's kind of why now I'm in a position where I've decided to say, you know, first and foremost, I love being a parent. Have loved the first 6 months of it, and I want to continue doing that and being a big part of Rory's life. And then on the other side, you know, golf is my biggest passion. It has been all my life. It's been with me since I was born. It is ultimately what I want to do when it comes to work or a career, and that's why, from a from a selfish perspective, again, that is, you know, one of the reasons why I've decided to go down this route with Florio Golf, in parallel to you know, raising my little boy as well. And I've been very fortunate, or we're in a very fortunate position that my wife has a good career, and she's really great and fantastic and supportive as well. I was able to, you know, have some long conversations with my wife as well about what works best for all three of us, and we decided that this, for the time being at least, is something that you know, works in all of our best interests. And so far, definitely loving it. And my wife hasn't complained yet either. So,
Well, long may that continue as well. So,
yeah,
Danny, thank you so much. And as ever, I hope with any guest that I have on, it's not like a one and done conversation. You'd be welcome back on the pod sometime. And just looking forward to seeing how Florio grows with you.
absolutely. Absolute pleasure, Kris, speaking to you as well today. And we'll definitely stay in touch, and we'll catch up again very soon, especially to talk about our challenge around how we're doing with our mobile phones as well.
I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you like what you've heard today and want to receive more inspiring and uplifting golf and life-related content, then please sign up to the GYH community. The link to that is in the show notes. But until we tee it up again for season 3 of the Golf Yourself Healthy podcast, remember to always embrace the rough and forever cherish the fairway.